Yeah. Let's see. Well, that's not her. Oh, yes, they've done this for each of the concerts. There is a member of the orchestra who because my wife, when they do Bruckner 10, it's my wife in it, and that's pretty high class.
So we should get a couple copies of that.
I guess, yes. Yeah. You may be lucky if you get any copies of the program when that comes out. Down there with a bag, just. Four. See what the math. I fell madly in love with Bruckner because of Bruckner 4. So that was fun. That'll be fun to do. So, but we don't need to talk about Bruckner today. Oh, I'll eventually get to do this. But I remember earlier this week when I said, Lori, there's only 2 pieces on this concert? She says, yeah. And I was surprised because so often you'll have like some overture from something to sort of get people in the mood. But in this case, just start out, and it's in reverse chronological order, which is high class. And you'll find that a lot of times that doesn't necessarily work because you end up going not just backwards in time, but backwards in styles. And it can be, the second piece, it can be really treacherous to see if that will actually hold up to a piece that is more overtly dramatic and that sort of stuff. But when you're dealing with Beethoven carries a lot of weight and can pretty much hold his own in the face of all sorts of insurmountable odds. So, having said that, this program is really fun from the fact, remember a handful of concerts before, the concert was all composers that you knew and all pieces you've never heard of, done by these composers. Well, this is the flip side of that. It's composers you know and pieces that you know whether you know that or not. For instance, the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto. Da 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 da. I remember Leanne House was accompanying me at one point, and she did these tone clusters. Boom, 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 boom. And then she said, da, 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 boom, boom, boom. And it worked. It was fine. It worked. So anyhow, this is an interesting piece of music. In part, it was his first piano concerto. He had written quite a bit of music up to this point. He was essentially 34 years old, and immediately what did I do? I ran back to what was I doing when I was 34? And I had actually finished my master's degree, so to a certain extent I had an idea of where it was going, but I hadn't accomplished anything. Whereas Tchaikovsky really had done quite a bit, and so here's this piece, and he's a little bit nervous because it's his first real piano piece. So he gets in touch with his good friend Nikolai Rubinstein, and asks, can I play this for you, and can you give me some pointers on how this is supposed to go? And Rubinstein just said absolutely nothing, and just was seething and just letting it build up. And Tchaikovsky wrote to a friend and said, you could tell that he was just angry, and it was going to explode any moment. He was just going to explode. And he got to the end, and Rubinstein just ripped it to shreds. This was such a horrible piece. It doesn't make any sense at all. And he said, you're breaking all the rules, or you're not following the rules, and all this sort of stuff. And he was so dramatic about it that Tchaikovsky decided right then and there that he wasn't going to change anything. Although, he did. One thing that he did change was he no longer dedicated it to Rubinstein. And he dedicated it to somebody else, and I didn't worry about, some Prince Ludwig van Beethoven. Then he had the first performance. Ultimately, he made a few changes in it, and what we hear now is the final version, which was ultimately finished about maybe 10 years later. So he did some touching up and adjusting. But he contacted Hans von Bülow, who is this guy who just shows up all the time in musical circles. There's not a whole lot of Hans von Bülow music that he wrote because he was a performer. So he performed other people's music, and so that was kind of cool. He was apparently a really good pianist because Tchaikovsky asked him if he would perform it, and he said, "Jawohl, I will do that. That is easy." Hans von Bülow also is known because he was the first husband of Cosima Liszt. Yes, and he was also what do you say? He was the conductor for all sorts of Wagner operas, for the premieres of Wagner operas. And so then when Cosima left him for Richard Wagner, that was a hard place to go. But he's got his feet in all sorts of doors and that sort of stuff. So his name shows up a lot. He was particularly rude to Anton Bruckner, so you don't have to feel sorry for him because Cosima actually said, "You didn't think that I would stay with Hans once I had the opportunity to hang out with a genius like Wagner." And so that having been all said, and he did this performance in Boston. Why in Boston? Because it was as far away from Moscow as possible. Partially because he didn't want any bad press in case it did hit the fan. But it didn't. It worked. And people loved it. And ergo, they still love it today. And life is great. A couple things about this. The opening. That you all say, oh, I love that piece. It's so gorgeous. Da, 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 and all this other stuff. The only time you hear it is at the beginning. It's the introduction, and it's about 4 minutes of music, and then it's gone forever. But it's kind of like the worm on the hook. He's fishing for the audience. And so he wants to have something he can put out there that people are just going to say, "Whoa, did you hear that?" And of course, that's what people do. And then they wait for a recap, and it never comes. It's just, that's it. You get it once. But this is not a problem because you know it. You've memorized it already. And every time you hear it, you'll say, "Oh." So anyhow, this is an interesting, it's the absolute flip side of the first movement. You really want to know this. The first movement of the Unfinished Symphony by Schubert. There is this magnificent and dark and turbulent introduction. And then you get the first theme, and you get the second theme, and then you get a repeat of the first theme and the second theme, because that's what you do with sonata form. And then go into the development. And what is the development? He develops the introduction. And he tells you when the development is over by giving you the first and second themes again. It's very weird. So anyhow, Schubert knew that introduction was really cool, and he was going to be real happy to just work on that. But Tchaikovsky is the other way around. Tchaikovsky gives you this introduction and then says, I'm out of here. We'll do other stuff now. This is a curious thing. Maurice Ravel told, he told students that if you did lots of, the German style of development upon development upon development, and he said, it doesn't need that. He said, give us a tune, you like the tune, give it to us again, and then go do something else. And to a certain extent, that's what we've got here. It's a nice thing. We never get tired of it. It's just, it's a wonderful thing. It's very lush. It's very romantic. Something, every time I hear it, I immediately think, back in the day when I was about this tall and watching TV and watching the Loretta Lynn show. And I think, she came out with gowns and bagels and stuff. And she came out, and I swear it was the da 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 da, and there she is. So this is just, it's just in our psyche. It's just there. It's just there. Another thing about this piece is that, and we as we got into the Romantic era, you got this more and more and more. In Mozart, particularly later Mozart, the length of the movements are all pretty similar. Each movement had its own raison d'etre, and there you are. And but here you end up. The first movement is essentially 20 minutes long, and you start thinking, "Oh, this is going to be killer." But then you hear the next two movements, and they're 20 minutes together. So that the center of the piece is literally the end of the first movement. And there's something about that. There's some sort of sense of balance that particularly Romantic composers were toying with. The idea of that you didn't have to, you could have a particularly long movement if you offset it with shorter movements that added up to about the same amount of time. There was this symmetry that was there, and that's what you get here. The first movement, one of the reasons that Rubinstein said this was so terrible was because he couldn't follow the form. Partially because it's kind of a rhapsody, and the idea of worrying about form and stuff like that, you worried about it if you were Haydn or Mozart, but after that you would use the form to your advantage rather than be locked into it. And so the first movement is this luxurious and beautiful and wonderful stuff. The orchestra and the piano are not in competition with each other. People always talk about some piano concertos. The orchestra and the piano are mano a mano, but that's not the case here. The orchestra accompanies the piano on occasion, and the piano accompanies the orchestra on occasion, and they're actually friends. They get along. And this is a very cool thing. The second movement, you start out as the slow movement. It's based upon a French art song that a French soprano, Désirée Artaud, used to sing a lot. And there was a brief sort of like affinity between her and Tchaikovsky. And we don't have to get into any other details, but eventually that didn't happen. But he still remembered the song. Tchaikovsky also liked Russian songs, but he also liked French songs. I think in part because neither of them were German. And so this was okay. And so you get this, the second movement starts with this very, very lovely, very, very, very almost precious melody, very charming, and then all of a sudden it breaks into this prestissimo, and this is the B section of this. It's A-B-A, so the form is not totally, this is not devoid of form, but the middle section is essentially the scherzo, the fast movement, and then it goes back and it does the slow movement, the slow bit again. And then we get into the last movement, the third movement, because, of course, piano concertos generally have three movements: fast, slow, fast, and allegro con fuoco, which means with fire. And in this movement, he is toying back and forth between 3/4 and 6/8, and your minds are going like, I did math. That's essentially the same. And the difference is that 6/8 is three groups of two, or two groups of three, and 3/4 is actually three groups of two if you start dealing with eighth notes, you know. So da 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 da. So that's this battle between duples and triples is kind of going on here, and that's very much fun, very much interesting stuff, because you end up wondering kind of where the downbeat is, because he's messing with this. And the cool thing about it is, in the next piece, the Beethoven, this plays with that same thing as well. The Beethoven, his third symphony, the Eroica Symphony, written in 1804, when he was 34 years old. You know, this is kind of getting these flashbacks. You're like, what does this mean? What does this mean? And, you know, think of other composers who, you know, at 34, Mozart was dead. So this, and think of what he wrote. A whole lot more than what Beethoven, but that's okay. We don't have to go there. So, the Eroica / Heroic Symphony originally was going to be the Bonaparte Symphony, named after Napoleon, because Napoleon was like this hero of the common man. He was also about this tall. It's okay. I think I could take him. But that's, having said that. And then when Napoleon declared himself emperor, Beethoven decided this is not part of the plan. So then, first thing he did was rip the cover page off and scratched off the Napoleon's name on the top of the first page of music. Scratched it off so far that he actually destroyed the paper. And retitled it the Eroica Symphony, the Heroic Symphony, and the dedication was in memory of, what was this? In memory of a great man. So he decided that it didn't need to be associated with Napoleon. One of the things about this piece that's kind of cool is that a lot of times pieces, we think of them as being influenced internally and externally, and Napoleon is an external, a non-musical gesture. You know, he's not like, for instance, this symphony, when you hear this, you won't necessarily be thinking Haydn and Mozart, because Beethoven has stopped thinking of Haydn and Mozart. He was doing something new, not unlike Tchaikovsky, who was doing something new. This is the problem that you run into when critics decide, oh, I don't know what's going on, it must be garbage. And then that's just it. They just write it off. And all they're really telling you is that they're morons and they don't have a clue what they're talking about. And the cool thing about this is that you get to make your own mind up, and I'm just here to sort of let you know, yeah, you can like it, it's good. And because it is. This is the first great romantic symphony. This is not a symphony in the style of Haydn and Mozart. It has 4 movements, but the first movement is very energetic, allegro con brio. There was a juggling group that would do juggling, and they would say allegro con brio, which means with scouring pad. But I know that's deep, right? Yes, most people don't know what SOS is anymore. But anyhow, so, this is a significant. It's curious too, because when you listen to recordings, some recordings are like the first movement is 12 minutes long, and some recordings are 18 minutes long, and you think, whoa, that must be some really wild differentiation of tempo. And no, it's just whether you repeat the A section. And traditionally, sonata form is A, A, B, A. And you'll find Ron Carey, for instance, if a piece has a repeat of the A section and the conductor decides not to do it, Ron gets his undies all in a bundle. Because, no, it's supposed to be A, A, B, A. The trick with that is that ideally, you get to hear the parts that are going to be used again in this piece. So you get to hear the first theme and the second theme. And then you get to hear the first theme again and the second theme again, because they're being repeated in the repeat of the A section. And then the development is when they take these themes and they throw them all together, and they can't figure out what key they're in and all that sort of stuff. And they demonstrate their ability to write because there you are. So this, I believe they're doing the A section twice, which is a good thing, because Ron will be happy. It opens with 2 very strong chords, and that may be meaningless or it may be meaningful. Curiously, 2 years before he started working on this, he wrote a piano piece called Variations in Fugue for Piano in E flat major. And what was this? It starts out with 2 big E flat chords. And why do I tell you this? Because this piece was that piano piece was used kind of as a template for this symphony. That now I'm stirring it all up. The fourth movement, because this is a symphony, it has 4 movements, count them 4. The fourth movement is 10 variations on a theme with fugues in it. Beethoven fugues are kind of a cool thing, because he worked very hard at them. Couldn't understand why Bach and Handel could write them, just drop them off the table. Another fugue. And he could just do it. And Beethoven worked at it so hard. But part of the thing with romantic fugues, y'all know what a fugue is? It's not fudge with a hard G. A fugue is where each instruments come in at different times with the same melody. It's kind of like row, row, row your boat, but you actually change keys and stuff like that. And it can be Bach is great at writing fugues. Handel wrote magnificent fugues. However, Haydn and Mozart didn't write fugues. And when Beethoven found the music of Bach and Handel and thought, well, that'd be cool. But it was too hard. He worked at it, and you hear is it the Hammer-Clavier piano sonata that has a big fugue in it, and it's heavy. It's just like hard work, you can tell. This should be so easy, but it's not. So anyhow, so that's what you'll hear this. You'll hear these various variations happening. And at the beginning, when you're hearing this, one of the things you will hear, and working in the garden in the springtime at my house, and there are birds around. And I would tell Lori, there it is, the Beethoven third bird. And she would say, what? And what is it? I'm out there and I'm working, and all of a sudden, which in Beethoven third world is da 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 da. And you will hear that, and you will say, I know why I came to this thing, because Bill is going to tell me about da 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 da, and you'll hear that, and it'll be cool because that'll tell you must be on to another variation. Eventually, he gives that up, but the plan is he wrote this with the aid of these piano variations that he put together. And he wrote it in reverse order. So the idea that I was stirring this up really wasn't a problem. Because the first movement that he wrote of this symphony was the last one. And then worked his way to the first. And so he could then, rather than trying to remember themes from the first, that he could just sort of, in the midst of the fourth and then in the midst of the third, decide, oh, I'll add this in there. And it was easy. It was easy because he had already written. It was like, was it Charles Ives wrote theme and variations, and it wasn't until you got to the very end that you actually got the theme. It was like so hidden in all of this stuff, so you just really didn't know. And but so this is it. It is not your traditional fourth movement. It's not. It has a theme and variations, and it's really the other thing that you get from this. Beethoven, when he did theme and variations, he would change keys. He would wander around. So the end result is you don't get the same tune sort of over and over again. You don't get sort of tired because here we go again. Variation number 6, and you start counting them. There have been pieces symphonic pieces that they've done here, and it said, yeah, there's 12 variations, and I literally counted them. I think Bolero by Ravel is essentially theme and variations, and in the programs they'll tell you how many there are, and the big challenge is, can we make this work? Do I have enough fingers? So anyhow, the third movement, going in reverse order, is the scherzo. Remember, we had a scherzo in the middle of the slow movement of the Tchaikovsky. This actually is a real scherzo. ABA, as scherzos are. And one of the things that works with this, the B section is this, it's horns going crazy, and so that's a lot of fun. But I remember watching Leonard Bernstein's Young People's Concert, back when the whole world was in black and white. And Leonard Bernstein was talking about this symphony, and particularly this movement, because he said, and you have all this triplet stuff going. And remember in the Tchaikovsky, I said he can't make up his mind between 6/8 and 3/4. He goes to duples, and it was so cool. And Leonard Bernstein said, This is what he does when he can't think of anything else to do. And so he just, you know, you have all this stuff and you're getting so used to the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you're buying it, and all of a sudden he goes, da-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. It's cool. He does a thing that's very similar to that in his 6th symphony, except he doesn't go to the duples. And it's just, I remember hearing a movement of the 6th, and I thought, this is it, any moment now. And it didn't happen. Waiting for the shoe to drop and realize, no, this person only has one foot. So, this is a cool thing that you get with this duple thing here. The second movement, this. Why are we all here? Because the second movement, this is the first of the great grand symphonic funeral marches. This is, Mahler 2 does not exist without Beethoven 3. There are just, after Beethoven wrote this funeral march in the middle of this symphony, actually it's not the middle, but actually it is the middle. The second movement is the middle span of time. It's just, again, the balance that I was talking about. The second movement is where the fulcrum is, and everything balances on it. But this is, the interesting thing with this is that you get this sense of passion, this sense of, and you just, it just tugs at the heartstrings. But then it has moments where things all of a sudden pick up. One of the parallels that always struck me was with Mahler 2, for instance. Mahler, you have the sad stuff, but then in the midst of the sad stuff, you remember good stuff that happened. And you get this flash of, I remember when that, and then you start to giggle in the middle of a funeral. But it's because you remember positive things. And that's what you get with this. It's really, really fun. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm married to the principal second violin of the symphony. And the reason, one of the cool things is, she said, and you're going to tell them about the clock, the tick-tock of the clock at the end of the second movement. I said, what? What? Who told you this? And she said, no. He's going, boom, 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 boom. And gradually other instruments pick it up, but it's the second violins that do it first. So, just letting you know. And you'll hear that, and you'll be saying, wow. You know, I got the inside scoop, literally from off the stage. Because she was like, obviously, this is time passing, you know, in this funeral march. I was like, so cool. So I had to mention that. The other thing is, right as the clock is finishing up, almost to the end of the second movement, there is this gesture. And Laurie says, it's straight out of Richard Strauss, Also sprach Zarathustra. Now this is one of the things that I will always tell you about Beethoven. Beethoven stole from all sorts of people who were not born yet. And this is a prime example of that, where he says, that Richard Strauss is just going to lap this up like a cat drinking milk or something like that. Because I listened to it, and it's subtle, but it doesn't sound like Beethoven. And it doesn't sound like anything that came before. And it doesn't sound like anything that was going to happen in the next 60 years. But there it is. And it's just there and it's gone. I can't tell you how many times I've been singing pieces by Beethoven, and all of a sudden, he stole that from Brahms. What makes it different from him, different from Brahms? Well, Brahms then played with it for 20 minutes, whereas Beethoven, here, look at this, Johannes, eat your heart out. And then he goes and does something else. He comes along and he does another musical gesture that is straight out of Stravinsky. And then he just drops it. And then he just drops it and lets it go. And Stravinsky then picks it up and plays with it for another 15 minutes. But it's an interesting thing. Beethoven, there are these things that happen. It's like, surprise, surprise, whoa, whoa. It comes out of seemingly nowhere. And so this Beethoven symphony, the first of the great romantic symphonies, and it is grand, and it is overwhelming, and it is not classical. And the symphonies after this have been written like crazy, imitating what this is. The power of Beethoven to affect people 100 years later is just overwhelming. So you get to hear two pieces written by two people who, when they wrote their respective pieces, they were 34 years old. And it's cool. It's cool. I was 34. I did not write this, but I can like it, and it will be great. And so please enjoy yourselves. This will be wonderful. This will really be wonderful. Thank you so very much.